All the good intros. This is Tunnels and Trolls take 3. The first two being too ridiculous to send to you, we're going to try to do one relatively seriously. If we break into chortles and giggles, you have to understand it goes with the territory. I'm Ken St. Andre, and with me tonight are my friends Bear Peters, Liz Danforth, and Mike Stackpole. Way back in 1975, in a room, didn't come out for 2 weeks until I had a crude version of Tunnels and Trolls. Had my friends not all been even loonier than I, that would have been the end of it. But since everybody loved it and we all started playing it, instead of learning a good game like you know what, history was changed and Tunnels and Trolls has gone on to sweep the world and become the most popular role-playing game that it is. Ha ha.
Oh boy.
So that you will recognize their sterling voices, I'm going to turn the tape over to them for a few minutes, and they can all tell you why they're involved with me in this wonderful adventure in corporate role-playing.
Okay. I'm Mike Stackpole, and the reason that I'm involved in this Tunnels and Trolls with Ken is because I never met him before I got involved. I, unlike the other people on the tape, am not a native of Phoenix, and I was living in Vermont, which, if you look at a map, is a long way away.
It's closer to England than it is to Phoenix.
In any event, my first brush with fantasy games was Tunnels and Trolls, and playing the solitaire adventure Buffalo Castle. And to make a long and belabored story short, I more or less decided that I could do what Buffalo Castle did, but do it better. And I turned out City of Terrors. And it's all been downhill from there. Now I'll turn this over to Liz.
Okay, I'm Liz Danforth, and my first brush with all of this was at a science fiction convention that was being held in California when I had run across Ken, and everybody was talking about playing Tunnels and Trolls, he and all of his friends. This was late the summer after Tunnels and Trolls was first invented. I came onto it early, not quite right at the beginning. As soon as the second edition of Tunnels and Trolls was being put together, Ken was pestering me for some artwork, which I supplied him. And I've been doing illustrations for Tunnels and Trolls, rule books, and solo adventures since. About 5 years ago, I started working for Flying Buffalo full-time. I am still doing some artwork, but more than that, right now I'm being the editor for Sorcerer's Apprentice, and generally trying to see that Buffalo continues to turn out products that everyone will enjoy. Next comes Jim Bear Peters.
I'm Bear Peters, and it was my unique, you might say, good fortune to have been on the spot when Ken came out of the creative, quote, cocoon, unquote, in which he'd wrapped himself to create Tunnels and Trolls. I was lounging around here just prior to the summer that Liz mentioned, and Ken grabbed myself and Greg Brown and Greg's then wife and dragged us into a cloistered closet and proceeded to beat us over the head with these odd set of rules. It worked remarkably well. I don't think I've seen anything that Ken's come up with since that's worked as well. But the testimony to its success is the fact that it's still bringing in both profits and enjoyment, people playing it widely throughout the world. I, on the other hand, have almost written so many things having to do with Tunnels and Trolls that I've managed to work my way into everything that's been done without ever actually having done anything, with the exception of My Dungeon, which would be the second that was ever done in Phoenix, and as a result the second ever done for Tunnels and Trolls, The Dungeon of a Bear. Available throughout the world at Tunnels and Trolls stores everywhere. I also am the author of an article on dragons, which I am inordinately fond of, and since I have nothing else to pad my part of this with, I'll leave it at that.
You're probably wondering why we're making this tape. Basically, it's because Chris Harvey, Flying Buffalo's agent in England, asked us to. He seems to be mad enough to think that you'd enjoy hearing our voices.
With our crazy American accents intact.
Indeed.
So we resisted manfully the urge to speak in your own dialect and are coming to you as we really are.
Essentially, you don't have the chance, because we don't get to England hardly at all to conventions and stuff. You don't have the same chance that American T&T players do to see us. So we just soon give you the chance that everybody else has.
So just imagine 4 handsome, suave, beautiful movie stars sitting around a palatial resort, and the picture you have in your mind will be far better than reality.
And you won't have to feed us either, so.
Will in no way resemble what's really going on.
Right.
So, now that you know that Chris has talked us into doing this, we thought we'd talk a little bit about how Tunnels and Trolls got started, and something that people have been asking us for ever since 1975, since the beginning, is to talk about our world. This is the world of Rrr'lff, with the city of Kazan and Kosh and all the other things that you see in the solitaire adventures. The world has been growing like Topsy. It's just a piece added here, a piece added there. We finally decided to impose
like
some
a
controls.
Frankenstein monster, it's
Trying
lurking
so
into your
hard.
home.
Thank you, Bear. I always thought of it more as a green slime, but
No, it is lurching, not oozing. Yeah.
Right, it was the patchwork analogy. I see.
Yeah, I
He's
have to
here,
agree,
he's
yeah.
there.
Trying to make all the pieces fit together, because
To-
they've come out of a lot of different minds. And if there are inconsistencies, consider the inconsistencies of history.
The other thing is that the world that we'll end up talking about is one that you don't have to play in. And we encourage people to invent their own worlds. But invariably through the solos, you've learned a little bit about it. So we thought we'd go ahead and supply you a lot of background that virtually only the people who are listening to this tape know. This information's never been published before and may never be.
Da-da-da-da-da-da. For the first time, friends, the true story of Rrrlff.
He cannot take his medicine.
Ken is sick as a dog, but he doesn't care. He's making this tape tonight in a do-or-die effort to get it done before 1983.
Well put.
Quite.
So, without further ado, we're going to do a rough version of the timeline that we use in the continent of Rrrlff here for Tunnels and Trolls play in Phoenix. This in lieu of a rather boring article that I had published in issue number 7 of Different Worlds 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. Take it away, Liz.
The dates, such as they are given here, are noted as pre-Kazan and Kazan. That'll become more understandable as I continue reading through the timeline. Bear with me for the time being. Okay. The Great Wizard's War, which is only vaguely referred to, occurred between 15,000 and 3,000 pre-Kazan. At that time, the world was all but destroyed. The conflict ended when those who weren't as tough as they imagined they were died out. Insignificant civilizations and nations, such as the wasted Cardigan, survive only in an organized form. Wizards all retreat into their
Wait a
dungeons.
minute, an organized form?
Vaguely organized.
Vaguely. They weren't totally stamped
I
out.
thought it was a disorganized form.
That's probably more accurate. Life
Filling up
everywhere
bureaucrats.
Stop praying,
does
Bear.
everything it can to recover.
A point that should be made at this time is that the dungeons referred to at this time are the strongholds. They were the focal point of the magical power of the wizards who were engaged in the war. The ones who died, their dungeons were slowly inhabited by the life forms that lived in the countryside that just moved in to these ruins. The others, in some cases, a vestigial ghost-like form of the former wizard, lived on and plagued the people who came to pillage it. In others, the wizard himself, maddened by, not angered, but rather demented by the activities of the Wizard's War, lived on as kind of a Puck-like figure, bedeviling the parties that came in.
Puck-like? I don't think Gristlegrim would like to be referred to as Puck-like.
He had
Hey,
a
you think he's small,
sense of-
black, and runs around on ice, you know?
He had a sense of disproportionate glee in pranks rather than in actual malevolence.
Well, that's true. I mean,
There you go.
he just thinks blood is funny.
Yeah, the one other note on this part of the timeline that probably should be made is that the Wizard's War probably did not last for 12,000 years, as the years might suggest. But nobody could quite remember when it started, and they were all real happy and took note when it ended. But it was bad. It was very bad.
For 1,000 years, everything was just dead, or nearly dead, and struggling to recover. About 2000 pre-Kazan, men had recovered enough to start fighting each other again. Rangers out of the...
Human nature, you know?
Yeah. Rangers out of the sea and other pirates were raiding anywhere ships could get near the beginning cities and villages that were springing up along the coast. About 1000 pre-Kazan,
But I'd like to inject one point here. An enormous amount of magical energy was used, abused, expended, and stirred up during the Wizard's War. And a lot of the magical sports, creatures like fairies, centaurs, and whatnot, were given their impetus from the magic expended during this
Impetus
time.
nothing. They were imported wholesale from alternate planes of existence to serve as cannon fodder.
some would be, but some would have been developed
Yeah.
on the spot by magic.
Just like you get mutations out of
rate,
radiation, you need that out of
The
magic.
power that enabled them to sustain themselves is inherently magical. A fairy logically could not fly. It's simply wrong
Is
weight,
illogical,
and it's an
yeah.
illogical creature, but fairies fly.
So do
A
bumblebees.
So do dragons.
A human torso could not support the body of a horse, and yet centaurs survived, and as Ken pointed out, were among the finest cannon fodder that the Wizard's War was to offer.
You ever try to stuff a centaur in a cannon? Doesn't
You
fit.
certainly can't unseat them, you know. But go on.
Meanwhile, back at 1000 pre-Kazan,
Right.
A ranger ship runs south and comes to the island of Thoron and founds the city of Gull. The Gull timeline, which is separate from this, although we'll be using the same dates, reckons its 0 point from this year. Cities of Azil, Dakar, Ilthar, Gar, Cold, Darkandar, and Therothar, or their historical antecedents by another name, spring up at this time. This is around the mouth of the dragon and up in the northern part of what is now known as Kazan's area.
We do hope to publish a map of Rrr'lff, other than the one that appeared in Different Worlds sometime in the near future, so that saying things like the mouth of the dragon will be meaningful to you all.
Imagine a huge dragon with its head facing the west, its tail to the east, and concentrate on the head and chest area. And that's the kind of country we're talking about. The head and chest of the dragon are the areas we know best and the areas we play in. There are ideas about some of the areas that aren't well known to us, but nothing real definite has ever been determined by any of us.
not so.
Not true.
Not thoroughly.
Nothing documented, and they are
Yeah.
regions best left unexplored at this point.
The one thing, one footnote I'd like to give on that entry, Bear alluded to the fact earlier that the world of Rrrlff is sort of a patchwork Frankenstein. Gull and Thoron and all that got grafted on wholesale when City of Terrors was first under consideration, and I wrote some articles for a magazine Ken was editing at the time, and it's literally how the world grows in little spurts and bounds. I had a history for the world, and it just got neatly injected in.
Okay, continuing with the history. In 975 pre-Kazan, the wizard warrior Nalus stops a rebellion in Cardigan and ascends to the throne of Cardigan. Over the next 2 years, he completes the conquest of the central plains of Rrr'lff and winters at the place that will eventually become Nor. He places Marianarsis at the Gap of the Teeth of the Gods, with the order to let no armies pass until he, Nalus, personally relieves Marianarsis. Unfortunately, at harvest time, at a banquet to celebrate his final victory over the whole area, Nalus is slain via magical means, and this does leave Marianarsis with something of a problem. Someone else takes over the throne in Cardigan, and by 950, nothing is left of that empire, except for something left in the original lands. There was a non-aggression pact concluded between Cardigan and Gull, and the pact stands. Nothing much was happening to the north exactly at that point, other than the continuing squabbling.
The trolls, the orcs, the elves, all the non-human peoples were doing fine in the north at that time.
Yeah, the reason that Nalus or Nalus, the Cardigan pronunciation in any event, the reason he actually swept up and tried to conquer the Central Plains is as Ken said, that trolls and orcs and ogres and all were running around north of the Teeth of the Gods, which is a mountain chain which neatly bisects part of Rrr'lff.
Now, the head of the dragon is neatly broken into 3 table-like planes. The uppermost part, the head of the dragon, is very mountainous, surrounding a verdant field, or verdant plain, where most of civilization takes place. There is a smaller plain to the south, separated by the Teeth of the Gods, and then there's a lower lying set of hills. The name escapes me at this time. The Axridge Mountains, with a large pass in the south that opens onto what was the Empire of Cardigan's huge plain. These 3 plains make up most of the stage upon which history is taking place here.
The Central Plains get run over
Almost nobody
constantly.
goes up into the mountains after the dwarves.
Okay.
Meanwhile,
500 pre-Kazan, the Rangers established a base on Foron in the north, Gull is in the south. The new city is named Minch, and the Rangers flourish as a culture for a time before being destroyed by various feudal lords in Foron who don't want Minch as a port to rival Gull. To the north, cities in the Dragon's Mouth, the little ones, Gar, Kol, Therothar, and the others, are proclaiming themselves city-states and beginning to eye each other with envy, and
they start charging taxes within their boundaries and look at the other cities, which they can then tax for more and let their people pay less.
and call it
thus
tribute.
happier.
Yes. Okay. Between 500 and 100 PK, pre-Kazan, the Dragon's Mouth area, those cities start fighting a lot of wars. Alliances are formed, shattered, and
Looks a lot like a diplomacy game.
probably.
Nobody turns their back on the other. Everybody is fighting. There's chaos. It's ruining the crops. The people are starving. The monsters in the hills are coming down and terrorizing the countryside. Just about that.
All right. In 100 pre-Kazan, the Rangers strike north and subjugate the city of Azil, which is right at the teeth, at the entrance to the mouth of the dragon.
If you can imagine a small-scale Mediterranean Sea with Azil and Izil being, say, twin Gibraltars, if you will, you have two fortresses at this point. There were also small cities or city-states at the foot of these fortresses. This is one of those that was taken at that time.
The other thing is, again, another footnote. The Rangers, who've been mentioned several different times, are pirates who constantly run around in the sea near and around Foron. They did have a base for a while on Foron, and their forebears were the people who established Gull. They also bedevil what is to become the Kazani Empire and the city of Azil, which will eventually become part of the Empire of Kazan.
Okay, as we approach zero pre-Kazan, there are more and more wars. The Isle of Dakar is taken by the Rangers, nearly tribute is one full galleon loaded with gold and jewels.
There's more and more wizards, too.
Yeah,
Oh God, yes.
They're recovering.
yeah. Everything.
Boy, are
Let's-
they recovering.
okay, that's one point that Ken should make mention of at this point is not only the wizards, possible nomenclature of the wizards, things of that nature. The fact that magic was making a return.
Okay. Magic, as I visualize it, and other people may have a different rationale, is inherent in the world of Rrrlff itself. So people draw their power from the land, whether it's mana or sunlight or whatever. Those who have the natural ability to use magic have it because it's there in the countryside. At this time, roughly 500 pre-Kazan to zero, to the year zero in Kazani terms, the Wizards Guild, far famed in song and story, and the Tunnels and Trolls rulebook, is establishing itself. Certain wizards are rising to preeminence, among whom are Kazan himself. There's a tendency to use the letters K and H as honorifics. As a peasant boy, just growing up in the mountains of the gods or something, his name was Azan. When he learned to cast his first spell, his name was Hazan. And when he became a great wizard, who could beat everybody who looked at him crossways, his name was Kazan.
Of course, that was several thousand years ago.
We should also note that that is probably specific to that branch of the guild, as that phenomena is not necessarily repeated every place else.
I think it's true. It's has to do with the linguistics, primarily the linguistics of the elves and the orcs. The orcs,
In the northern half of the...
origin is not known for certain, but it's said that they are degenerate elves bred by an evil wizard. Nevertheless, the elves have a tendency to use aspirated sounds in some of their language forms and to use the K sound. The orcs like the K sound great, karg, and words like that are perfectly orcish.
It's hello in Arkish.
Either that or your overtime park.
You're stepping on my baby?
Well, stepping on a baby was one way to keep it from wandering off.
They weren't hurt by this.
No.
Give the term babysitter a whole new meaning.
Orcs are tough, that's why. Anyway, linguistics is not what we're here to discuss, except as it bears on the history of this part of the world. For one reason or another, the wizards in this part of the country tended to name themselves with a KH at the beginning of their name.
As things continue to unfold, the cities as well started to pick up that same referent. At zero, the year zero as reckoned on this timeline, Kazan arrives in the city of Jerome.
Which is a ghost town in northern Arizona.
Steps through a dimensional gate and appears
In Jerome, in the Isle of Rrrlff. Okay. He and his fellow wizards, he was already a mighty wizard at this point. And they move into the city and start ending the strife that is everywhere throughout the plains. Azil called for the Jerome to honor an old treaty and liberate itself.
Figured that Jerome, which was now known as Kazan, could do it because they had a bunch of wizards running around, which meant lots of firepower, and the Rangers didn't have wizards running around, which meant they didn't have a lot of firepower.
A footnote at this point would be if you've ever tried to play Tunnels and Trolls as a tactical game, laying siege to a castle, if you explore even the slightest potential of any of the magic, you realize the awesome firepower of a wizard. A catapult is nothing compared to someone who can make your walls dissolve. As a result, a major wizard, one on an extremely high level, like Kazan was supposed to be, was rapidly enforcing peace on this whole region with his cadre of supporters and friends and the army of the city that was to come to bear his name, Kazan, backing him up.
He finds a troublemaker. He says, "Do you like butterflies?"
Oof, you're a butterfly.
He could out-magic their wizards. He could defeat their armies in the field. He was both a tactical genius and a wizardly genius. As a result, he was unifying the empire. Azil looked for him to liberate them from the, being taken over by the raiders. And this fight, well, as will be mentioned here shortly, this fight was the final unification of the northern part of what would come to be known as the Empire of Kazan.
Which extended probably clear south into the third plane, past the second plane, into the third plane. By the time you get to 500 Kazan, you get the Pax Kazan, if you will. Human.
That's Pax. Pox is little marks in your face.
There she goes, folks. She was doing so well. No,
Anyway, that was our bit to throw in a little Latin there.
Anyway, the human and the non-human cultures begin to flourish at this time. Scholars see the time as the apex of human civilization, certainly. Chivalry, magic come into their own. Alright. By the time you get to 610 Kazan, Rrr'lff is born. She's an elven princess, but her father is a powerful orcish wizard. He raised her as a child after her captive mother died in childbirth. By 650 Kazan, Rrrlff has completed the unification of all the orcish tribes. She meets Karakang, who is Kazan's renegade apprentice. Then they begin their 16-year-long war for conquest of the head of Rrrlff.
Or the Empire of Kazan, whatever you will.
Indeed. When I get around to writing my greatest sword and sorcery epic, that's probably the story I'll use.
Okay.
As is noted in the solitary arena of Kazan, by 666 Kazan, in the face of incredible human losses, Kazan agrees to surrender to his enemies, Rrrlff and Karakang. In return, there is a cessation of hostilities. Rrrlff agrees, and Kazan is entombed in an island that wanders through time. It appears in the Dragon's Mouth on an island once each century. Parts of it were explored in 1002, but the wizard, who's rumored to be merely sleeping, wasn't discovered. From 666 until 766, another 100 years, Rrrlff and Karakang complete their rather bloody and deadly conquest of the Dragon's Head. The
Brutal, oppressive, vile, evil. Never mind.
Nasty. Sorry, Ken.
Oh, don't get carried away.
It's true.
I am the man who wrote Monsters, Monsters. You must...
The Central Plains cities are told to pay tribute. Nor strikes the H from its name. It was KHNOR, and it became KNOR. And it protested this, didn't help any, but it was the least they could do. It was also the most they could do. Rrrlff proclaims herself the death goddess and establishes the arena for proper worship of this.
What's the word for that? Megalomania?
That's right. Something like that.
She's mortal, folks. Death goddess or not, powerful sorceress or not. She truly is mortal. She just has...
Delusions of grandeur.
There's something you may have noticed as we blithely passed over it here, is the fact that Kazan had lived from 0 to 666. It's an attribute of high-level wizards that they tend to go on.
And on.
And on.
Rrrlff was following in his footsteps.
Right.
Okay. At 850 Kazan, the Kazani death fleet is destroyed off the Isle of Foron. Stories vary between calling it a ranger battle, a Foron defense effort, a storm, or the intervention of Byron, the wizard mentioned in City of Terrors and other solos.
Actually, it was a bunch of saboteurs who pulled the corks out of the bottom. question. You have just been spared 9 minutes of drivel about corks and ships because the tape ran out.
Unless you're listening to the other tape, which has got it.
Okay, in the year 900 Kazan happened the infamous Kazan Ranger Wars. The histories of the Kazan Ranger Wars vary incredibly, but it's generally agreed there was some damage to Kazil and Kizil, which you heard earlier as Azil and Izil. They added the K after Kazan took over the cities and pacified them. Kazani troops chased the Rangers out of the dragon's mouth, and yet they did not venture further in pursuit. Reasons for this also vary.
They didn't have any ships.
And more dribble about corks and ships and all that jazz.
All right, 975 Kazan. The Rangers assault and almost take Gaul. Prince Baraja takes the throne before his father, who was slain in the battle. The Rangers are chased out by an organized assault from the commoners and thieves section of the city. 990 Kazan. Kasht is virtually leveled.
Now we're getting to
incredible.
the first Tunnels and Trolls games and Monsters games that we played here in
1/3 of the
Phoenix.
city burned to the ground and below into the beggars' warrens.
Maybe it was that bad.
BJ the Great, a character belonging to the infamous Mayor Peters.
No.
Stop that.
Wrong theme music.
He rises to power, taking over the city, and reluctantly but effectively pilots Kosh into its destiny.
He tried to turn it over twice. Every time somebody would show up, some monster would come out of the woodwork and clunk him. So he had to take over and run things.
He's done
An
a
excellent
wonderful
job he's done, yes.
In other words, I didn't want to rebuild my city after these clowns had leveled it, so I gave it to Bear.
He probably rebuilt it, doubled the size, increased the size again,
And lowered taxes.
lowered taxes. It was great. Just because there was a vicious rumor that during the night the city was on fire, several places were pillaged by someone who looked a lot like Nevermind.
Unfounded rumors
Yes.
by political adversaries and
Onward
people who hadn't been paid off.
Basically, the Phoenix people, us here sitting and the friends we play in the years about 990 to 1020 Kazan. That's, the earliest result of our depredations. All right, now we head into the future. These are not things that we've played out, but we have assumed or seen.
These are things that soothsayers have perhaps predicted or alluded to.
For a suit.
Right.
Okay. In 1300 Kazan, Karakang disappears and is presumed killed.
I maintain he was just lost in the library.
I think Bear's closer to the truth.
I think he didn't pay his rent.
For crazy giggling.
Kang!
Kang, of course, being a word which is Elvish for slain. This was someone's joke in typing this on the
Anyway.
timeline.
This lays the groundwork for a dungeon that Ken is preparing.
Are we ready?
Just the welcome. Lays the groundwork for a dungeon that Ken is preparing, which will pit Rrr'lff against another wizard who is rising in the north, sending down gales of freezing Kerbwale and generally
Starting
destroying the
professional
world.
hockey leagues and stuff.
Exactly. With Karakang gone, Rrrlff loses another half of her already diminished forces. After the dragons left, her power was cut in half. After Karakang goes, her power is diminished yet again.
And by 1313, she falls. Some predict, thump.
Slipped on the ice, broke her hip, stuff like that.
Yes.
I don't know, I think she just ran out of golden apples of youth, or somebody revoked her magic license.
That's
Well,
possible.
if all of magic and
Anyway.
the rise of technology was happening at this time, her powers were being destroyed faster than could be believed. Some people say that it's freeing Kazan from his tomb.
The ultimate upshot of all of this is by 1313, a vast upheaval takes place. It's something that no one in our timeline is going to know, simply because it hasn't been done yet.
I'm playing with it, but it probably won't appear from Flying Buffalo, so it's strictly pseudo-history at best.
Yeah, that's again one of the things about the patchwork world that we have here is that While again, certain seers in Kazan predict the loss of magic and the rise of technology, others can predict the return of Kazan and the liberation of all the good kindreds and such.
Still others predict devaluation of the gold piece and a massive inflation.
Right, nuclear holocaust and things like that.
My idea was, since everybody wanted to turn, after 5 years of playing Tunnels and Trolls, everybody wanted to turn it into a space role-playing game and version of Traveler, was that we'd just get rid of the magic, run the world of Rrrlff up to the year 2000 or something.
No one has ever given any thought to the idea of running a Traveler-esque future role-playing game where you have both blasters and magic. Ships powered or held together by magical spells. The potential is incredible. Why get rid of... Never mind. Why get rid of magic?
Why get rid of magic? My rationale was that it didn't work off-planet. And even though they have these dimensional gates that take them through a multiverse of parallel worlds, enough parallel worlds, friends, for you to all kill Rrr'lff as many times as you want.
Take over Nor, Kost, and Foron, personally. The fact is that there are so many different branches that it's impossible for us to try and bring in everyone else's work. We're having a hard enough time agreeing on things like this timeline
Periodic
ourselves.
fights break out between Mike, Ken, and I on just exactly what and who was doing
Someone mentions
which.
Nor, and I
so on.
start snarling.
The whole point of this, at this point, is that you can do anything you want with our timeline, or you can go beyond it. You can branch off at any point along this timeline and do your own history. Or you can start at the very beginning and say, after the Wizards' War, everything was different.
Or even better yet, create your own world with your own timeline and have visits into the world of Rrrlff only at the beck of some powerful wizard who opens up a dimensional gate to vault your hero through for some crucial action.
Either that or you just wander through. I postulate these gates are
Everywhere.
all over the place,
Everywhere.
and they're indistinguishable. I mean, you can be walking along and go through it without even noticing. This explains how your adventures are so strange when you're over at your friend Clyde's house, and so normal when you're playing at home.
One of the other things is,
Popped into a different world.
again, one of the other things that does bring up the whole idea of the dimensional gates in the patchwork. When we were preparing a little bit of this timeline, I was reading what Ken had written up, and he said that in Kazan there was one moon, and I distinctly know, I've seen it many times, in Gull there are two. So without a doubt, probably the shipping and trade routes getting into Gull passed through one of those dimensional doorways, which may have remarked why there was so much trouble with the Kazani Death Fleet and stuff like that. Who knows?
Okay, now that we've given you this rather garbled version of history, we're open to questions from the floor.
As the floor has no questions, we will generate them spontaneously.
Oh, I was waiting to hear a question just come out of the tape recorder, but you guys don't have any questions, huh? If you have any questions, send them to Chris Harvey.
Yeah, Chris will forward them to us, and
20 years from now, you may get an answer.
We'll do our best to answer them if you send them seriously.
yeah.
If you send them
That's not
comically,
necessarily
we'll do our
the question
best to
will be
answer them
answered seriously.
comically,
Right.
yes.
Do make sure, if you do send questions, to write out very carefully your address. Just the same as the United States address system seems strange to you, it's difficult for us to figure out how to piece together an address to return something over there in Britain.
They still get mail twice a day.
Yeah, they get it twice a
We find ourselves at the end of our topic and with considerable tape left. And since you paid for an hour's worth, we thought we'd share some of our own feelings about Tunnels and Trolls and the world we play in, our own special corners of it with you. I'll start. I'd like to talk a little bit about sources. Tunnels and Trolls and the other fantasy role-playing games were not created in a vacuum, folks. We owe more than words can say to writers who have gone before. At this point, I do have... Ideas are free. Ideas belong to everybody. My sources are fantasy writers, English mythology, European mythology, Norse mythology, Japanese mythology, American Indian mythology. In the early days, I was especially indebted to Lewis Carroll. My favorite book was Alice in Wonderland, and Jub Jub Birds, and Bandersnatches, and all such devices, creatures, and so on were the first monsters that I used in Tunnels and Trolls games. T&T for me was always meant to be played with your tongue firmly up behind your ear someplace. It's to be fun as well as role-playing, you know. You're not just Conan the Barbarian hacking down everything in your path. You're Bear Peters the Barbarian, making everything in your path fall over laughing. At the beginning, I created the city of Kosht to be used for testing monsters. After half a year or a year of playing good guys killing monsters all the time, I wanted to start playing monsters killing good guys.
Ken's always been on the monsters side. As reflected by the reign of Rrr'lff.
After the monsters won, I decided and gave the city to Bear. I decided that I needed a new arena for my enthusiasms, and wrote the Dungeon Arena of Kazan, and that was the beginning, really, of the city of Kazan. Everything we have said about it, printed about it, every nasty rumor, and so on, has developed afterwards. I think of Kazan as my particular corner of the world in which other people are not free to take liberties. Only I can take liberties. And it is a city where human beings are a minority. It is the stronghold of Rrr'lff's power. She is not human. She's half orcish, half elvish. She doesn't even particularly like humans. She just tolerates them. It is a city where trolls and orcs and giants can wander the streets unmolested. It is a city where humans, you know, have to get a license and a permission to live. And consequently, if you're reading Arena of Kazan or Naked Doom or anything else I ever write about the city of Kazan, you'll see that the monsters have most favored status and the humans have least favored status. And this is just because after a year or two of watching what the humans did in this game thing I had devised, I decided that the monsters needed equal time and a champion of their own. Other people have different viewpoints, notably Bear.
I think my place in this comes in when Ken turned over the city of Kosh to me. We were playtesting Monsters, and a small, very comparatively small band of monsters were responsible for almost totally burning the city to the ground. Ken then rather disgruntledly cast it off, and I ran around, gathered up all the pieces, and glued them back together. In Kosh, it's almost the antithesis of Kazan.
What's that mean, Bear? Antithesis?
It's almost exactly the opposite of the way that Ken runs Kazan. The monsters are tolerated in the city from sunup to sundown. After dark, they have to be accompanied either by humans who will swear for their behavior, or by a writ from the city government. Otherwise, they're hunted down by groups that patrol the streets to see to it that monsters don't run rampant after dark, as a logical result of the city being burned by the monsters in the first place. They do trade. That's one of the ways that the city gets a number of its less agricultural items, but they're generally just tolerated. The city of Kosh has grown several times under my relatively benign care, but ultimately, it still does not rival the power, size, and sway of Kazan.
That's because it's not a seaport.
Of course, it's an inland city. It grew on the river trade running from Kannur inland, and the forestry running south from the forests, the old forests north and northeast of the city. It's also thriving now on the cattle and the other food industries, but generally speaking, it still owes its survival to the existence of Kannur at the river's mouth.
Oh, I think it lives completely off dungeon delvers because there are so many dungeons in the vicinity.
Yeah, that's very true.
The rumor that it takes a wheelbarrow full of gold to buy a loaf of bread in Kosh is totally unfounded.
2 wheelbarrows.
Get out of here. It's just a little inflation. We can cure that. Supply side, economics.
Trickle down. BJ's making it rain gold.
Downriver from
We're
Kosh.
staying the course.
Downriver from Kosh, out on one of the few decent port cities along the chest of the dragon is the city of Nor. It can probably best be described as anarchistic at best.
I wanted to call it Kneither, but Liz wants settled for Nor.
The city was founded by pirates, probably rangers, and enjoys a very free-form kind of existence. Monsters are not the honored species, neither are the humans. Humans probably outnumber monsters in the city, but the two means of getting around in the city are either on the edge of the sword or with lots of cash.
Doesn't that hurt your feet?
Yes.
That's the end of
Build
the
up
sword,
palaces,
especially.
Nor is a trading city. It trades down to Foron, sometimes up to Kazan, sometimes it just trades tribute, in the past anyway. It's mostly an independent city-state in the time being played now as is Kosh. More described. Now, I developed Nor early on because we needed a seaport. We were out running around in oceans from time to time and needed some place to come and go from. I also developed the city that is known by 2 names. Now, this is partially because of its history. It's partially known as Carthage and currently known as Sharas. Under Kazan's rule, the wizard Kazan, it was only too happy to be a part of the empire, and it took the K name of Carthage. It had been a small trading village at the foot of the Axe Ridge Mountains, about 2 weeks out from Kosh. And when Rrr'lff took over, it was enough out in the boondocks, out in the backwoods, that it was able to become more or less independent sooner than some of the other cities. And Rrr'lff's oppressive rule, among other things, led them to change their name so that they were no longer in any way connected with Kazan.
Give me oppressive.
Became
Depressive.
Sharas, yes. Depressing, perhaps.
100 gladiators a year for the arena cannot be considered oppressive.
Well, especially
It is when your population is 2,000.
a little rough there.
Anyway, Sharas is fairly well detailed. Now, that is a city where monsters with all the gold in the world are not allowed in the front door. They are absolutely unwelcome in any way, shape, or form.
They're on the leading edge. You might say.
The leading edge of what?
The sword.
That's the sword, yeah.
And of course, you all know about Gull. Mike has gone to incredible lengths to detail it in our biggest solitaire adventure. And then, in case you get bored with that, every 2-3 months he comes up with a mini adventure to add into another back alley or something.
Not every 3 months.
Every 6 months.
Gull is again. Gull had its advent really before I ever moved to Phoenix, and before I really came to know the people who are with me this evening. The Gull has also changed as it has grown from City of Terrors. Gull is probably the most repressive as far as monsters are concerned. Monsters that are not native to the city or not native to the island are generally given a white slip of paper. And if they offend any of the citizenry...
If they eat the white slip of paper, they're out of luck.
If they offend any of the citizenry, the citizenry are fully allowed to slay them where they stand and just sign their name on the white slip of paper, and the body will be taken care of, and that's all well and good.
I had the impression, with temples to the orc god and whatnot, that monsters
that was temples to the blue beetle god. That's entirely different thing. After, of course, Kazan had attempted to take over For Honor, had sent a fleet out, and after the Rangers have taken it over, the people in Gull became a little bit xenophobic, as it were. They don't mind visitors as long as they've got a lot of money and don't mind leaving it behind.
Typical Californians.
Yay. But they, for the most part, Gull doesn't really need monsters around. They are very much a trading city. Often a stop between certain places and trips further around the
As opposed to Kazan, which is very much a tribute city.
Right. Gull does a lot of trade in gems and gold. Has got a very active thieves section, and like Ken, I've written stories about Gull and things going on, as Ken has written stories about things happening in Kazan or Kasht and things.
If you're lucky, you'll never read them.
Yeah. Or at least not have to pay for them. But I think with all of us, the cities and the places that we play in and around grow. They don't stay and stagnate. By the time, say, you get a copy of the next adventure any of us will have done, the cities will have grown beyond that. And certainly in your own games, changes can be made and take place very, very easily.
We have just a few minutes left, and we thought we'd finish off this tape by talking about our favorite characters and why they are our favorite characters. We're going to start at the other end of the table with Bear. And if there's any time left, I'll do something silly.
My favorite character is BJ the Great. His name was Bjorn of the Far Fjords. He never used that after the first adventure. He was a young, enterprising wizard whose dexterity barely met the minimum requirements. He was constantly hiring big, burly thugs to bodyguard him, usually to protect him from the depredations of his own party. He was prone to making decisions out of the passion of the moment and then regretting them afterwards. His warriors that he hired were all given classical Greek names, but the tendency was for him to expend them in some frivolous fashion and then be cornered by the rest of the group for wasting the biggest fighter in the group. Through a variety of circumstances, he managed to survive into a kind of middle stage. He reached third level and began to be able to sustain himself. He took a private commission and became something of a military figure. This made his financial success, and from that point on, his history ties intimately with the city of Kasht. He established something called Goon Hall. It was his residence, but a variety of esoteric people kept showing up.
Unlikely hoots and tweets, I believe was the equal term for them.
Would show up and move in from time to time.
It was a synonym for the place where Bear and other people in the group actually lived.
This leads me to why I like BJ so much. BJ is very close to what I am. Goon Hall parallels the places that I lived during the time Tunnels and Trolls was being made up. We were usually the very lowest strata of employment, going to college and putting our way through it, or unemployed from time to time as vicissitudes of the economy would warrant. And as a result, a variety of people would move in, share the rent, move out. Others would move in. The science fiction club met there frequently. As a result, it picked up the name Goon Hall. My characters reflected that, and BJ reflected myself more than anything else. I don't know what would have happened if BJ had died along the way. Probably someone else would have taken his place, but he never did, because I think I put more of myself into him, and as a result fought harder to see to it that he stayed alive. Anyway, he's settled down, if not me settling down, to a relatively comfortable life, running Kosh, and his success is virtually assured.
Bear has settled down to a relatively comfortable life, running a bookstore, and his success is fairly well assured.
At any rate, I think that's probably why my character, or why BJ as a character, appeals to me so much. I've had others. Klon the Super Barbarian was much more heroic, but none of them appealed to me quite the same way.
How about Oscar the Outpatient?
Who fought with a bailing hook.
This is the one we really think of as Bear, you know. It's...
Oscar, I did have a character named Oscar the Outpatient, and I think his sole claim to fame is he's the only man to crawl lengthwise through an alligator. It was alive when he started, it wasn't when he finished.
Let's have a few other people talk.
Okay, probably my favorite character is not by any means my highest level. The woman Kyrie Firehand has the unique distinction of being the very first wizard warrior as written up in the 5th edition. The rule arrangement had been determined, but no one had rolled one until I looked down and realized that the dice were handing me the first wizard warrior. She, for all her higher attributes and abilities, managed never to amass more than a few cents. A gold piece was beyond her comprehension. And the Firehand designation comes from using things like Bacna, and being unable to afford poison puts things like hot chili pepper oil all over them. It doesn't do any great damage, but it stings. Strange. She has to rely on peculiar and unusual things that are not in the rule books. Pepper thrown in the face of a monster may give you an extra combat turn.
Again, it may make a friend for life.
Yeah, it all depends.
It's true.
And what little
Spicy
money she
dungeon
has, she
tales.
always has to split with someone else. But she's grown, changed, and the battle to make
Now she's a
living.
linebacker for the Chicago Bears.
The work she has to go through to make an ordinary living is what makes her an unusual character, an interesting character, to say nothing of the fact that, like I said, she was the first wizard warrior ever rolled up.
I think that my favorite character is Carban, who's loosely Carban Pete Poacher is his surname. His nickname is the Mega Hobbit. He was a refugee from Ken's Naked Doom many millions of years ago, and I think the reason that I like Carban, and I would designate him as my favorite, and it's not an easy choice at all, is because Carban is unique in that he's never met anything he couldn't beat up. And there was...
No living hero has that problem.
That's true.
It's not true.
There was-
Next Flaming Cherry.
Well, that's in a different way, Ken. But there was one particular adventure that Bear ran where we were attempting to stop a Lovecraftian god, Cthulhu, from coming into the world, and it was very, very apparent from just the mathematics of the situation that Carban was going to die. And as a player, I wanted to pull Carban out of the battle, but I also knew that Carban, as a person, would never leave, and he didn't. And by a strange quirk of fate, and the fact that someone else was running an 18th level or 20th level wizard under the guise of a 2nd level wizard, Carban managed to survive. But anyway, like I say, never having